Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to our Meet the Editors panelist event. Just to introduce myself really briefly, I'm Kiara Quinn. I'm from Johns Hopkins University. I'm one of the several grad students who have worked together to help put on this event. And ultimately, this is our very first event for what we hope to be a collaboration across multiple universities. Our group is called NEXUS. And we're hoping that we can host both virtual events like this and in-person events at different neuroengineering-based conferences. So again, if you are interested in that, the mailing list sign-up form is both in the chat or there are QR codes at the respective universities probably printed out. But enough about us. I would like to introduce our panelists who have agreed to join us. We have 4 different panelists, each from different journals, and they're going to share their insight into the editorial process, what it's like to be an editor, and how we can best prepare our manuscripts for submission. So we have Dr. Valda Vinson from Science, Dr. Reza Shadmehr from the Journal of Neurophysiology, Dr. Stephen Kemp from Muscle and Nerve, and Dr. Lee Fisher from IEEE TNS-RE. So I'll go ahead and let them first introduce themselves a little bit more. So I guess the first question to kick this off is, can you tell us briefly a little bit about your experience as an editor? How long have you been an editor? And what journals do you work for? And what role or responsibilities do you have in your respective journals?
Okay, well, I'll start. My name is Valda Vinson. I'm the executive editor at the Science family of journals. I started as an associate editor. That's kind of the entry-level position for professional editors at Science, the journal Science itself, back in 1999. Just for the connection, before that, I was at Johns Hopkins, where I was did graduate school and my postdoc. I started at Science in 1999, handling papers in biophysics, biochemistry, and structural biology. And I was, after about 5 years, which is our normal time, I became a senior editor. The function is basically the same. You just have more experience. And then I moved on to become deputy editor of life sciences at Science, and then editor overseeing life sciences at Science. And through all that time, I was handling papers. Then recently, I became executive editor. I no longer handle papers now. I oversee Science and our sibling journals. And that's Science Translational Medicine, Science Immunology, Science Signaling, and Science Robotics. And nowadays I deal more with, policy and problems, and I don't actually handle papers.
Did you want me to go next?
Sure, that would be wonderful.
Okay, hi, I'm Reza Shadmehr. I'm a professor of biomedical engineering at Johns Hopkins. I'm a scientist, and as being a part of a community, one of the services that we provide is to edit papers. And I've been an associate editor at a number of journals. I was the editor at Experimental Brain Research, an associate editor at Journal of Neuroscience, and for the past 6 years, I've been a deputy editor at a Journal of Neurophysiology. My primary role in these positions is to decide whether a paper is going to get sent out for review, who will be assigned the reviewer, then collect the reviews that we receive, have discussions among the reviewers and myself regarding the decision that we will make regarding the paper, communicate that decision to the authors in a constructive way so that their paper improves, whether it will be resubmitted to our journal or sent elsewhere, so that hopefully they have a positive experience and they gain something from that process. As I said, I view this as very much a duty of ourselves as scientists to be members of our community and be a part of the publication process, which is so central to advancement of all scientists.
I guess I can go next. Hey, everyone, I'm Steve Kemp. I'm an associate professor of plastic surgery University of Michigan, and also cross-appointed in biomedical engineering. I probably have the least experience of the four people here on it. I've probably been an ad hoc reviewer for 30 journals or so, but I've been the associate editor at Muscle and Nerve for 3 years now. And I have very similar things, jobs to what Reza was explaining in there. At Muscle and Nerve, I'm basically responsible for almost all of the basic science submissions that come in, although there are, if it's in my area on prosthetics or any of exoskeleton stuff, clinical research, then I also will take care of those, and from time to time other clinical, but predominantly I was put in as like the basic science sort of person. There's some things. So happy to be here and talk with them.
All right, my turn. I am Lee Fisher. I'm an associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh in the departments of physical medicine and rehabilitation and bioengineering. I actually don't have that much more experience than you with this, Steve. So I'm an associate editor at IEEE Transactions on Neural Systems and Rehabilitation Engineering. I've been in that role for about 3 years. And really that came about, often when you start a faculty position, you're very inward looking, trying to get your lab up and running. And then as you start thinking about promotion and tenure, you start looking out a little bit more. As Dr. Shadmehr mentioned, you start thinking about service. And so joining that board was an opportunity to start that service for me. And so, it's been a rewarding experience. Certainly gives you a little bit more insight into this process that hopefully we can convey to all of you today. And I think, the role and the tasks are very similar to what you've heard. The one thing I think maybe I'll add that's not always so clear is part of what we do is sort of this exercise in herding cats, which is that you have many faculty, maybe postdocs and sometimes senior grad students that serve as reviewers for these journals, and they have many different responsibilities. And so part of our role also is just kind of reminding them, making sure they're actually submitting their reviews and sort of following up with them. And that is, I would say, actually one of the larger parts of what at least in my experience, what we end up doing is, hey, you're going to get that review in, we want to make sure we get this back to the authors soon. And so in addition to those other pieces, that's maybe the one additional responsibility I'd add that we have as editors.
Great, thanks to all of you. I guess a question to build off of some of what you have mentioned is that you're sending this manuscript to reviewers, and it goes through some sort of process. Can you walk us through maybe how these submissions are assigned to reviewers and certain editors, and where our submissions go once we click submit on our end?
I can tell you with Muscle and Nerve. So when you submit, so we have 5 associate editors and 1 editor-in-chief. When all of the manuscripts get submitted, they go to the editor-in-chief, who actually does look at every single one. And then he will then determine which of the 5 associate editors would be best to manage that paper. And then, sorry, what was the second part of your question, Kiara?
What happens once they go to reviewers? Like, what does the typical process look like?
So I think Lee's right. It's a lot of herding cats in my experience too. So sometimes you get lucky. So if we see, for me, I always try to pick someone who's an expert in the field to evaluate whatever it is. So if it's on nerve and peripheral nerve regeneration, I try to get someone who's there. And then, but a lot of times, you get unlucky, and sometimes 14, 15 people won't review. And then so you have to keep moving down the list. And then Lee's right, a lot of issues with getting people reviews in on time. But for us, then once those come back, at least at Muscle and Nerve, so they will all come back, and they'll come back to me, and I'll get an email saying that all reviews are in for manuscript X. And then I will then make my report, and my report then goes to the associate editor, or sorry, the editor-in-chief. And in that, I have a whole thing where I explain to him that, look, this is what I think we should do with this, be it reject, accept, revise, whatever. And this is what the reviewers do. And I try to, I think maybe my reviews are a bit longer than needed, but I really want people to understand, for instance, if we're rejecting, I kind of feel bad sometimes, and I just want to make sure that they know that this is why this paper was rejected. Here's where you can improve, but both reviewers thought this, so do I. And then the associate editor will then, the editor-in-chief will then make a final decision. In the 3 years I've been there, he's never gone against what I've recommended. But sometimes if he has questions, he'll ask. And then the editor-in-chief will be the one who emails you saying, here it is, either it's rejected or you can resubmit.
I'll go add a little bit to that. So when you submit a paper, you will also submit a list of names of people that you would like to suggest as reviewers. And if your paper gets assigned to me, I'm going to look at your list and probably pick all of the people that you've suggested. In addition to that, I'm going to read your abstract. I'm going to read your introduction, probably read most of the discussion, so I get a sense of what this work is about. And I'm going to look at the references that you have, and I'm going to pick names from people that you have referenced so that I have a pool of, say, 10 people or so that I'm going to draw from. And then I'm going to write a letter to a number of those people, an email, where I will briefly summarize what I have read in your paper. And I will say, I think this is going to be of interest to you as a potential reviewer because of these findings that are in this paper. Now, hopefully that will make it easy for them to say, yeah, that sounds interesting. I hope to be able to review it for you. And then the rest of the process is, as Stephen mentioned, you return the reviews and then you make a decision based on that.
One thing I want to actually follow up on, and I'm curious to hear from maybe all of the other panelists about this too, that, we get specific guidance from, so it is this editor-in-chief that is in this role to kind of give guidance about the kinds of papers they want in the journal. They're the ones assigning to, associate editors each of the manuscripts. But towards this point that Reza just made, one of the pieces of guidance that we get at TNSRE is that, so typically and I think this varies from journal to journal, we typically expect to have at a minimum 2 and sometimes 3 reviewers for each article. It can be, if there's some contention and some disagreement, we might bring in an additional editor, or sometimes I will just also provide my own review and to help weigh in. But one of the pieces of guidance we've been given by our editor-in-chief is that if, let's say we only have 2 reviewers on an article, they cannot both be people that were recommended by the authors. We can pick one of them, but then we also have to have somebody who is not on that list. And so it's one of the things I always worry about. I think about a little bit in terms of strategy, and there are strategies, which I think we'll probably get into in a little bit later in terms of when you submit a paper, but how much, depending on how big the field is that you're kind of focused on, how extensive you want to make that list of recommended reviewers. If, you're at a journal where it may actually restrict who I'm allowed to select as reviewers if you've listed them as a recommendation. So I don't know if any of the other panelists can weigh in on how that's handled at all the various journals, like what's allowed in terms of those recommended reviewers.
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit for the science journals. First of all, our process is just a little bit different because, our reviewers are professionals. So what we do is deal with the papers. We don't have another job as well. So the editors, we have deputy editors who will assign the papers out to, we have about 25 editors. So the papers, we have 2 deputy editors in the life sciences, 1 in the physical sciences, and they assign the papers out to editors. The editors are encouraged and most to read the paper and make comments on the paper, make their comments on the paper in our database. And at that time, they send it out to we have 200 members of our board of reviewing editors. So that's not an in-depth review, it's an initial review. Those board of reviewing editors' comments come back, and then the editor has kind of a gut check because they've like, do they agree? Do they disagree? And so, if both you and the board of reviewing editor are saying this should go to review, then definitely it's going to review. If you're both saying no, then it's no. But if there's some disagreement between you, then the editor will read much more carefully and think about it. And but then at the end of that, you're deciding whether to go to review. And then the editor selects reviewers. We also would be hesitant to have all our reviewers be from the suggested list, but we have no rule against it. So you're asking the editor to look at that. Now, if I start looking at a list of suggested editors and I see, wow, I know they were in the same lab as that person. I saw them at a meeting hanging out with this person all the time. If I get the sense this person has given me a list of their friends, then I am more likely to say, well, no, I'm going to find different people. So there's a little bit of that. But if I look at that list and I think, wow, those are exactly the two reviewers I would have asked, and I know of no connection between them and the author, then I'm likely to say, wow, this author's being really, upfront, and so I'll ask those two reviewers. So there is a little bit of, of just the editor's own sense of the situation there. And we prefer to have 3 reviewers. Sometimes we have to have at least 2. That is a journal policy, at least 2 reviewers and preferably 3. We get a lot of, at Science itself, so many multidisciplinary papers that we often need multiple reviewers just to cover all the technologies in the paper. And yeah, then when the paper comes back, again, then it is the editor deciding, whether we should accept this paper or reject it or take it through revision. And that's done by the editor in consultation with colleagues. So every paper we have also has to be seen by more than one editor. So the editor will make their comments, circulate to colleagues, and then together we decide. If there's disagreement among editors, then it gets sent to a deputy editor, and occasionally, if there's real controversy, then I'll see the paper. But generally, I see papers because there's like a data issue, use issue, or things like that. So yeah, that's kind of, that's about it. But the other thing that's different at Science, I think, is that the editors actually literally edit the papers. So if the paper is going to revision, the editor will first do an edit on the paper, try and give some sense of, these reviewer comments we see as really critical to address, and also give, say things like, this, if you just gave me some more context, this would be much easier to understand. Because sometimes, people really try and shorten their paper in the introduction and make it really difficult to follow. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you. So feeding off of that a little bit, when we get that decision back, whatever it may be, sometimes you have to write a response to reviewers, and sometimes you can even appeal a rejection in the case for some journals. Can you talk a little bit about what the appropriate tone or what you look for in a response to reviewers, and also if someone is trying to appeal a rejection decision, what criteria do you consider when evaluating those requests, if your journal even does consider those appeals?
I can try to answer that a little bit, although I'm sure Valda has much more experience with with that. Of course, I've been on both sides of this. I've had papers rejected that I've then tried to have some discussions to see if we could reverse the decision. And I've been on the side of being an editor where I've sent out a rejection and I've received letters asking for whether we could change our policy, change our response. I think in both cases, I would say there has to be a compelling piece of logic that says the decision was an error, and it needs a reconsideration. And the response has to clearly indicate what that error was and how it can be remediated. It can't be, something that is a difference of opinion or something subtle, perhaps. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to be on the editor side and receive letters that says, this decision that you made, please reconsider it for these reasons. And but it's also difficult to write those letters to say these are the reasons why I think that this decision was incorrect. And I would say in my experience, it's quite rare for decisions to be reversed, maybe 20% or something like that.
Yeah, I guess I'll go because we get huge numbers of these. And it sort of seems to depend on the grant cycle and things, because we'll go through phases where just everyone appeals the rejections. But we so our guidelines are we will only reverse a decision, as Dr. Shadmehr said, if there is clear error. So and we're not, and we admit there can be error. So we are open to if someone says a review, not only does there have to be error, that has to have been the basis of the decision, or a key basis of the decision. So sometimes we'll get back, oh, these reviews are terrible because this reviewer got this completely wrong. And if you go through the comments, you'll see that the editor said, well, the reviewer was wrong here, but it doesn't, so it can't be something like that. You can't find one point where the reviewer was wrong and expect the decision to get reversed. But if the reviewer has been wrong on something so key that it has affected the decision, we have overturned decisions on those grounds. The reviewer just, thought they'd done the experiment one way when that's not exactly how they'd done it or something. It often means that the paper wasn't clear enough, like the materials and methods weren't clear enough, so the reviewer assumed something that wasn't true. So I think that, you need materials and methods need to be really clear. And or they can claim bias. And if that's, but, the number of times, I could count, I can't even remember a case. I'm sure there's been one or two where the author comes back and says, this has clearly gone to my major competitor, blah, who just doesn't believe this at all and is biased. And that we would take seriously into account. But most of the time, people come back and say, this clearly went to X, Professor X, and it absolutely didn't. It actually went to, it's amazing, it went to one of their suggested reviewers. So authors get that part wrong a lot. The other thing we will consider those, but it's rare. The other thing, probably the most common kind of appeal we get is, I can address all the concerns. And generally we do not allow resubmission based on that, unless, and that's why this is, I don't even want to put ideas into anyone's head, but it can sometimes be worth it for a journal like Science, if you can just sort of firm up the experiments that are in the paper. But if there's something like, with us, it's often that the paper's, solid up to a point, and then the authors have done the experiment that would turn it into a science paper and just haven't even done a well-designed experiment. They've done an animal experiment with too small an N, or something where they've done kind of some preliminary experiment that is not going to make it in any seriously rigorous paper. But I could see it could be a preliminary experiment the LAMP could do to see, is this worth pursuing? And so if the ones where we do sometimes take another look, if is when we reject a paper like that, and the author comes back and says, oh no, well now we've got much more animal data, and so there we will, if it's an exciting paper, we will sometimes take another look then. But it would really have to be, it's almost like the paper got submitted too early, and the authors had, and sometimes with those, we send an actual resubmission letter, like, we will look at this again if you get extra data.
Wonderful. And I don't know if anyone else wants to add, but it is 1:30, so we can, of course, move to student questions from the audience as well. So
I did have, if you don't mind, I have like a couple other things I just wanted to add to that. So, because I think part of the question you asked about was the tone that you take in in the response. And I think, this goes towards a point Dr. Vinson just made. It feels like when you get reviews, there's sort of three buckets I think you can put them in. One is you just get this rejection, right? It's like cut and dry. It's like the paper wasn't well written, the experiments aren't well designed, or whatever. Those, let's set those aside for now. There's these two other buckets of well-meaning reviews that are trying to constructively make the paper better, whether it's through a revision or if it's a rejection. And then there's a set that's this person has a grudge against you, or doesn't like your overall approach or whatever. What we tend to do when we get these anonymized reviews is we assume a lot of times that maybe one of the three reviewers is in that last group of people who are kind of like just out to get the research or whatever. And at least in my experience, and I think this goes towards what Dr. Vinson just said, you're almost always wrong about that in terms of who you think the reviewer is. And the vast majority of people that are, serving as volunteers, right, to review these papers, really their mission is to make sure that the science is as rigorous as possible and that your paper is as clear as it can be. And so they are there to support pushing the science forward, right? And so they may push you on some things and they may challenge you, but it's very, especially when you're new at this and you've only maybe written one or two papers, you put that paper in and it feels like, I just put so much work into this, I'm so proud of this thing, and then somebody comes back and criticizes it and it feels like a personal attack against you. And so often, like when students, the first draft of the things they write, if I see a response, as an author, if I see a response from the student that says, we respectfully disagree as the starting point, we will usually go back and redo that response, because it's, what you need to do is take a few steps back and give it a few days, take some time away from that response and really think critically about what were they trying to convey to me, and ideally do that from a point of view where you don't think that they are out where it is a personal attack, right? And try and understand what the point is that they're making. If you have something in the paper and they ask you a question that completely ignores that thing that you said in the paper, that may mean you didn't say it clearly enough, right? And so that, I would still treat those as a thing where, okay, that's an opportunity for me to make the paper stronger because they read this paper and they missed it. And so, but it's an important thing in the way you write these reviews. You will not do yourself any favors by taking sort of an aggressive and confrontational tone with your reviewers, who, again, remember, are volunteers, who, their mission here by and large is to help make the science stronger. So I'll stop there.
No, thank you. That was a wonderful addition. Okay, I'm going to pass it off to some of our students in the conference rooms to ask some of the student questions.
Yeah, I can you guys hear us?
Yeah.
Okay. So one question that a couple of students have asked on the platform is that, so they want to publish a review paper on their research topic. What steps should they take to successfully publish a high quality review paper?
So in muscle and nerve, our review papers are only invited. So I'm assuming it's different at the other journals, but you can't just write a review paper and submit it. You have to first submit a request to either myself, one of the other 4 associate editors, or the editor-in-chief. And then we discuss it as a group, and if we think that it's good for the journal, sorry, then we give an official invitation to submit a review. But I don't know how it works. I'm assuming at the other journals it works differently. I don't know, maybe one of you guys could talk. I'm not sure, but that's how it works with us. It has to be invited.
Yeah, it's true. Just as you said, Stephen, it's the same at Journal of Neurophysiology and Journal of Neuroscience and Experimental Brain Research, but reviews are sought after. So if you're interested in writing a review, by all means, this is a very worthwhile thing to do. They're highly cited papers. Typically, they improve the journal when they appear in it, but it's just a matter of selling the idea to the editor and then spending the time to write it.
Yeah, at Science also the reviews are mainly solicited at the science journals, but we do take ideas. So the thing is to write a proposal that is fleshed out, but not so long. Don't send the whole review. So send in a page that really outlines exactly what the review would cover, why a review is needed in this area at this time, how your review would be different from other reviews that have been written, and then it'll get considered. And even if we say no, I mean, maybe then you it's still something you've thought hard about, and you may be able to pitch it somewhere else. And this has also been put into the heads of the editors, and so maybe they'll come back to you in the future. So I think it's something worth doing, but you need to really have flesh out the idea, and it needs to stand out as among everything else out there.
Maybe the last thing I'll add is I think it's important to consider what kind of review you're talking about. So, you can do these sort of something that is like a high level overview sort of survey of some area of the field, right? Where essentially what you're doing is just saying, here's all of the things that people have done. And those tend to be great articles for somebody who's new to the field to come in and read, to get some sense of scope, be able to see 150 or 200 different references that are all things they can go look at. There's another kind of review you can do that's a little bit more formalized, where you go do a PubMed search in a very specific way with specific terms, and it allows you to kind of narrow down, and it is more of like a sort of a scientific process to get to, here is a set of articles that cover a specific topic. Here's how many of them talk about X, or, and so there's sort of different approaches that you might want to take. I totally agree that with all of these things, you should start with a conversation with an editor before you go down that road. But there are kind of different approaches you can think about here in terms of those reviews. And it really depends on what the goal of what you're trying to convey is.
If I can ask just one follow-up question before we go to another student question. For reviews and just regular submissions for research papers, sometimes journals offer those pre-submission inquiries. How often do you get those, and are they effective? It sounds like in terms of review papers, they are, but maybe in terms of research papers, what are your thoughts?
I've never actually gotten one through the muscle and nerve system. I've just gotten ones from people directly emailing me, actually. So I don't, I'm fine with that. But even reviews, people will email me and say, hey, can you do it? But I've never gotten it through it. But I will, the same thing, I will sort of, if they talk to me before, I usually ask for their abstract and see what the paper's about. And if I think it's a good fit for the journal, then I'll say yes, or I'll say no for this reason. And then they either submit or don't from there.
Yeah, we don't have a formal process, although we talk about having a formal process, but at this stage, it's just by email to editors that the pre-submissions come. We do consider pre-submissions. For reviews, I think we ask that they actually go in through our system as a sort of a proposal. But for research articles, we consider them. But the most likely response you'll get is, we need to see the full paper. Please go ahead and submit. And no editor wants to be, what sometimes happens is we get emailed the full paper and say, you know, are you interested here? No editor wants to do that because we can't put it through our full process. And then you're relying, you know, you have to spend as much time as you would on a submitted paper. You can't send it to Board of Reviewing Editors. There's a bunch of things you can't do because it doesn't have the same, you know, you don't have, the author hasn't done any of the submission, so you don't know what you can and can't do, what's private, what's not private. So we really don't like getting full papers submitted, emailed to us to ask as a pre-submission. If you send, a lot of times we get the abstract, and most of the time we will say, we'll need to read the full paper. But for our other journals, I mean, it is worth, so for, you know, if you want to go to science signaling or science translational medicine, science immunology scope, I think, should be more obvious. It would be worth a pre-submission inquiry to say, is this in scope, for example, because that the editors can very easily do. But otherwise, it's if you've got something very exciting and you want to do a pre-submission inquiry, it won't hurt you. There's not going to be any black mark against you because you did it. It will put it in front of the editor's mind once, and maybe there's some value in that. If it's really, really exciting, they'll probably say, wow, yes, go ahead and submit. But on the whole, I think, yeah, it's just that the full paper is more valuable for us.
Great, thank you. We can go to another student question now.
Hi, so we're asking from Johns Hopkins. So one of the questions that we got from the Q&A is pilot long-term studies often have success and failures, and some of these failures are valuable data, but the data itself might not be appealing as to positive results. So the question is, how do you best prepare a submission when the data are not pristine?
So I think I heard two things in there. So, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong. So one of them is, what if you get negative results? What do you do with those? And the other was, what if the data aren't pristine? You know, at least in my experience, the data are never pristine. There's always things that didn't quite go the way you thought they were going to go when you did the experiments. And I think in those cases, you know, certainly, I guess it depends on how much things didn't go the way you thought they were going to go. And, you know, and to me, I think being open and upfront about where those weaknesses are and how that affects interpretation of the results is an important part of the process, right? So those should be things that are in the discussion. I think you should lay out the methods, exactly what you did. And in the discussion, you should talk about what were those limitations, what impact do they have on interpretation of the results? And certainly depending on, you know, how serious those limitations are, that will affect things like, you know, which journals may or may not be willing to accept the article, right? In terms of negative results, this one's tricky. And I've had this issue as an author a few times recently. And part of the reason this is tricky is you have to differentiate between, there's two cases. One is I did the experiment properly and it showed a negative result. And two is I did the experiment wrong. And therefore we got maybe an ambiguous result or a negative result. And so often what we will do in those cases is maybe try and ask some colleagues that are sort of experts in the field, like, here's what we did, beat this up, tell me what is wrong with it, and try and help to make sure that you're not missing some core thing that ended up with you getting a negative result. And I think if you can make it through that process where, you know, what you don't want ideally is for you to submit the thing and then it comes back with reviews poking some fundamental hole in what you did that should maybe have been obvious to you. And so that's where I think it's useful to just get that feedback from other experts in the field before you go through that, you know, all of this, the work that's involved. And if you can make it through that step, then I think, you know, it's important to lay out negative results. And, you know, you may have to, there may be some discussions there about what journals would want those studies. And, you know, but I think to me, that's still a really important thing to do. You just want to make sure that what you're submitting is really, like, this wasn't just an issue of you didn't collect enough data or you designed the experiment improperly or something that ended up with that negative result.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you say, the data are never pristine. But I think that I completely agree. Openness is the most important. It's more important than which journal your paper gets into, way more important. So, you know, we're dealing with so many cases of data, you know, it's all put under data misconduct. What we're looking at is mainly bad management, basically sloppiness, figures put together badly, so panels are used in the wrong place. And I mean, so that's a different topic again, but I can't help but mention it because we are dealing with a lot of this right now. So you know, keeping all your data very organized and using all your data is incredibly important. And if that means it doesn't really support your hypothesis the way you wanted it to, that's the data, you know. So then, you know, maybe you can't go to the same journal, maybe you have to rethink the hypothesis. But I'll never, you know, I was a postdoc in Tom Pollard's lab at Johns Hopkins, and we were getting different results from another lab, and we were both trying the same, you know, we could not figure out how both our results could be right. And someone in the lab started saying, well, they must be doing something wrong in that other lab. And Tom said to us, the number of times the data is wrong is very small. The number of times the ideas are wrong is very high. Start thinking again. That's just an anecdote from my past.
We can go ahead and ask another student question too if no one wants to add.
Yeah, so this question is more related to the career development. Like, so one popular question is, what factors initially attracted you, or how did you become an editor? And also, like, if you, what percentage of the time is typically dedicated to this kind of job?
I can answer that. I'll answer the second question first. Probably a full work day, maybe a week, I would say, in time. But I do this on the weekend, at nights, whenever I can. But I would say if I was putting all the hours together, for me anyways, probably it would be the equivalent of probably one, maybe two work. It goes in cycles too. Sometimes I don't get anything for a bit, and then next thing I'm flooded with like 15 manuscripts. So it's sort of cyclical. I don't know how everyone else is, but for me, when I first started, I was very lucky that I had Dr. Sedurna as my mentor. And when I came here, he said, you know, what do you want to do? What do you want to achieve with your career? This is where I think you should be. And so in addition to joining these societies and getting better known in them, one of the main things was, and then also getting as a grant reviewer, one of the things was doing this with journals. And so I became very active in accepting a lot of the paper requests that I had. And so I was reviewing for a lot of journals. And then I was lucky, Dr. Ming Chen, who's in University of Alberta in Edmonton, who's a colleague of mine, was an associate editor, and he said he would probably be stepping down in a couple of years. And he said, you know, I really like your reviews. Can I ask you for more? Can we be more involved? And typically, so I took a non-traditional route because at Muscle and Nerve, you're supposed to be part of the editorial board before you become an associate editor. And I wasn't. I just went right from reviewer to associate editor. Some people said this because we're both Canadian. I don't know, but I think the thing is that I really wanted it to do a lot, and I spent a lot of I spent probably more time than someone on the editorial board did reviewing papers. And then when it came down to it, Ming was a strong advocate for me. I don't know how many other people applied for it, but for me, I just that was sort of where I see where I wanted my career. So from day one, when I became a PI, I was already thinking of what am I going to do in different strategic ways, whether it's grants, whether it's whatever. But this was one thing that I wanted to do. So I was thinking of it from day one.
I have a different take on this. I feel that science is this unique place in society where taxpayers are willing to give us money to go after things that intrigue us. And we police ourselves, meaning that we are the ones that sit on review committees, whether it be for a grant or for a paper, to determine who gets the money, whose paper gets published. And it's a really remarkably trusted community that we've become, because we're not only given the material to do it, we're also given the authority to decide, by and large, who will have the opportunity to do it. And therefore, it's really our duty to participate in this process, not just be consumers, but be advocates for it, be a part of the process, whether it be reviewing papers, whether it be editing. It is a privilege to be a scientist because of that authority that's given to us, and that is a part of the being of the community, be a part of the community of science, the process of science. And this is just as important as collecting data is to edit papers and review them.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to that. You know, I think there is this advantage that you get this peek behind the curtain. You get a better understanding of how these processes work, kind of how the sausage is made, which is true for grant review as well. For me, I think at a minimum, in terms of being a good citizen, I think you should be, like, in terms of peer review, you should probably be reviewing at least one paper per paper you're submitting per year, so that you're at least having a net zero impact on the field, and ideally, you know, a little bit more than that. I'm one of probably 45 associate editors at TNSRE, so my workload is a little less than Steve's. I'm assigned at any one time, I'm probably managing 4 to 5 manuscripts, and those are in various stages where, you know, the first thing you're doing when you're kind of reading through it and then assigning reviewers, that takes a little bit more time, and then later on it's mostly just following up and then making that decision. So I spend a few hours a week on my editorial responsibilities, and then it really depends on, you know, what's coming in as far as peer review. But try and do approximately, you know, a review per paper I'm writing that year, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, and of course, with me, it's a little different because I'm a professional editor. That's what I do all day long, every day. I think it's sort of at a journal like Science, it makes sense because we have so many papers coming through. It's really, you know, we're trying to set this bar, and of course we don't get it right all the time, but we're trying very hard to maintain some consistency. And so with professional editors, we're talking to each other all the time, trying to make sure that we're keeping the same bar across the journals. And, you know, I'd say it's a really exciting job. Why did I choose to go into it was some pretty complex. It's always been, I've always had this dual interest in sort of the sciences and the humanities from when I was in college. And so choosing the sciences sort of full on was kind of a hard decision for me. And then so finding a career that went back to being a little bit of a combination, for me was really exciting. And yeah, and I guess, you know, again, it still does come somewhat in waves. So sometimes I'll have a week that everything seems to be going pretty smoothly, nice 8-hour days, all is good. And then you get slammed. So, but for me, the great thing was, you know, I actually took this job when I had very young children, 2 sort of very, very young children. And for me, it was that even if it was a lot of work, I could spread it out on my own time. It wasn't that if I was, you know, I was 3 days into that this has to happen this minute now kind of thing that experiments have.
Great, thanks for all of your insight to each one of you. I think we're just about wrapping up on time, but I did want to leave space for the 4 of our panelists to say any final thoughts they might have, either about the editor process, about anything in general. This is an audience of grad students, for the most part, so feel free to share any insights or comments.
We'll say one thing, which is that writing is a culmination of completing something. And unless it's written, I believe it didn't really happen. Therefore, it's really important to actually finish by writing that paper and getting it published.
Yeah, and I would make a similar point. And don't, you know, the number of times it feels like authors, even writing for science, are sort of begrudgingly writing their paper because they have to do it. And so really to emphasize this is part of the process, and to think you should be able to write a paper in 2 weeks when the work took 2 years, you know, is maybe not realistic. So I think putting in the time and the effort to get the paper written up and to have everything organized, not like, oh, which blot goes on this blot again? So just take the time over writing up the work, because that's part of the process.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, if anyone ever has any questions or anything, just feel free to email me. Anything, if it's about muscle and nerve or about any other nerve, but obviously if you have questions about muscle and nerve, students email me all the time. So please feel free to email me with any questions you have.
Last thing I'll add is I'd encourage all of you to talk to whatever faculty members you're working with about participating in peer review. It's super informative to be on the other side of it. Like one of the things you'll see is how frustrating it can be if somebody hasn't put the care into the quality of the writing, for example. And so I think, and it also will show you just like what this process looks like. And so, you know, I would definitely encourage all of you to get involved. You can, you know, do these reviews in partnership at a lot of journals with your faculty mentor. It doesn't have to be you by yourself. And it's a really great way to learn more about how the process actually works.
Kiara, thank you so much for putting together this. I wish I had this when I was a graduate student.
It was a culmination of a lot of graduate students that are not on camera here. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to all of our panelists for taking the hour time out of their busy day. Hopefully this was informative to our graduate students, and we can put on more events just like this. So thank you.
Thank you.